As the U.S. death toll surpassed 60,000 yesterday, the president seemed to revert to his old line of thinking that the virus will just disappear. This claim has been refuted time and time again by the administration's own top experts, who say the virus will come back in the fall and will likely be worse if it coincides with the flu season. Here is Dr. Anthony Fauci on Tuesday, and the president contradicting him yesterday.
It's not going to disappear from the planet, which means as we get into next season, in my mind, it's inevitable that we will have a return of the virus, or maybe it never even went away. When it does, how we handle it will determine our fate. If by that time we have put into place all of the countermeasures that you need to address this, we should do reasonably well. If we don't do that successfully, we could be in for a bad fall and a bad winter.
Without a vaccine, sir, why do you think the virus will just be gone?
It's going to go. It's going to leave. It's going to be gone. It's going to be eradicated. And it might take longer. It might be in smaller sections. It won't be what we had. And we also learned a lot. Again, if you have a flare-up in a certain area, if you have I call them burning embers, boom, we put it out. We know how to put it out now, but we put it out. And now we're equipped.
Might the new normal look like 2-3 years from now? Say restaurant workers, hotel workers, might they be required to wear masks, that sort of thing? What would the new normal look like?
No, I don't see that. I see the new normal being what it was 3 months ago. I think we want to go back to where it was. I mean, when I look at a baseball game, I want to see people right next to each other. I don't want to see 4 seats in between every person so that the stadium becomes 25% of its original size. No, I want to see the NFL with a packed house. I don't want to see NFL with 3 seats in between people. No, I want to go back to where it was. That's where we're going to be. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, we'll have some massive rallies and people will be sitting next to each other. I can't imagine a rally where you have every 4th seat full, every 6 seats are empty for every one that you have full. That wouldn't look too good.
Joining us now from the White House, NBC News correspondent Carol Lee. Carol, good morning. Good to see you. So the president indicated yesterday that those rallies that he just talked about there may be happening very soon, as in next week. He talked about a trip to Arizona. This as those White House guidelines for social distancing expire today, I should point out. And the president said yesterday he doesn't see a reason to extend those. What more can you tell us about his plans beginning as early as next week?
Well, Willie, we know he's not going to be doing big rallies anytime soon, and I think that was one of the things we heard from the president and some of his aides yesterday. That was more of how they want things to be rather than how things are going to be. What we know is that the president's going to travel to Arizona and Ohio, and these are going to be small events. They're similar to what we've seen Vice President Mike Pence do when he's traveled outside of Washington in the last few weeks, although we don't expect that the president is going to do medical-focused events. Again, this is all in the vein of the White House trying to shift attention away from the medical aspect of this, the pandemic, and focus on the economy. So he'll be in Arizona likely with doing some sort of event that is either geared towards showing that the virus is going to be waning and will go away sometime in the near future, that there'll be a recovery or some sort of economic focused event. And so and he's been wanting to do this for some time, and they've been talking about how to make this happen because the president, frankly, travels with a very large footprint, and this time that's not necessarily what the White House has been advising people to do.
Carol, you're also doing some reporting on that meeting last week in which President Trump is reported to have screamed his campaign manager, Brad Parscale, over the phone when Parscale brought him those battleground polls, not necessarily the ones we showed, but their own internal polling. He can write off public polling, as he often does when it's inconvenient for him, but this is internal campaign polling, during which Parscale said you would lose the election if it were held today. What more can you tell us about that meeting?
Well, there were multiple discussions about this that we know of, and they were very tense. The president, we were told, was in a horrific mood when he was shown these polls. And typically, his advisors will show him more positive polls, and then maybe try to work in some of the more damaging polling, and that didn't happen here. And I think there was almost a sort of intervention to basically say that, like, look, something has to change. And I think that the president, at least we've seen this week, kind of agreed to some of the changes in how he's presenting whatever he wants to say publicly, the types of events that he's doing. Today, he's going to do an event with seniors. And Joe was talking earlier about how the president's public polling has dropped with seniors in Florida. That's a real concern. And so you're going to see him do an event later this afternoon that's focused on seniors. But there's sounding alarm. There are alarm bells going off inside the White House and inside the campaign about this. They're very concerned.
All right, NBC's Carol Lee at the White House. Carol, thanks so much. And Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.